What's going on, everybody? Sam Shapiro back here with more of your Heat latest on FanArc. Don't forget to drop a like on this video, and of course, subscribe to our channel for great daily content, all pertaining to your Miami Heat right here, Monday through Friday. Precious Achiuwa is returning to the 305. That's according to Shams on a one-year non-guaranteed deal. The former 20th overall pick from the 2020 draft that Miami selected just a few seasons ago is going to be making a return to the 305 and hopefully fixing some kinks in the armor that the Miami front court is really been experiencing now with that lack of depth. So hopefully adding this forward to the rotation will help kind of bolster Miami's at least depth in terms of big men that they could have suit up night in and night out. Now, there were talks about the two parties potentially being interested in having a reunion, come back together. So it's nice to see Miami really trying to make some strides and adding a much needed big man to their rotation. Now, initially, Achiuwa was dealt from Miami after his first stint to Toronto, involving that deal that brought Kyle Lowry to the 305. But again, just very exciting to see Miami interested in a forward that now has a little bit more NBA experience under his belt, and hopefully can at least contribute to efficient rebounding that could potentially help a Miami team that, again, doesn't have a lot of big men in their rotation. And I think that he could match up pretty solid with some of the guys in the backcourt, despite Tyler Herro not starting out the regular season with them as well. So kind of moving over to some of the details regarding this trade, especially right now, at this point in time exactly, Achiuwa is not being counted over the luxury tax. Miami was $1.6 million below before this move was made. So assuming that this deal does potentially become a fully guaranteed deal, that would probably put Miami over the luxury tax line. But as of right now, it's still kind of having Miami sit pretty under that luxury tax line. So, but also with the addition of this, Miami has no spots or no open roster spots left on their roster by adding Achiuwa. And I think, again, just it's a smart move because they kind of almost have a familiar idea with what they're getting because they drafted the player, or they drafted Achiuwa rather, and they kind of know he didn't really develop into the type of forward I think they wanted him to his first stint, but I think that they know what he is capable of doing and know what he can at least bring to the table will help Miami kind of bolster a little bit more success on the court. So if Miami does decide that they want to add him to the opening day roster, his contract could even become fully guaranteed later in the regular season towards the trade deadline. So they wouldn't necessarily have to really bargain if they wanted to surpass that luxury tax line until later in the year. So I definitely think, again, that also is why this is a fairly smart move in acquiring a guy like Precious Achiuwa over maybe some of the guards that they are kind of testing the waters to see how they're going to bolster with Miami, at least in training camp at this point in time. So like I was kind of saying before, Miami now, again, signing him to a non-guaranteed deal kind of gives them the option to see if reuniting with him will be a glass slipper kind of fit, and if Achiuwa will really be a good mesh in fitting with the team's current roster. So I definitely think this is kind of giving the opportunity to test to see if a long-term reunion this go around could really be a viable option for Miami and really create some quality depth for them, in contrast to kind of what we've seen with at least the whole Terry Rozier situation. Again, two very different scenarios because Rozier obviously in Miami's backcourt being a point guard, but again, it also kind of just bolsters the idea of him potentially coming back, adding a solid piece to Miami's front court, and then really just seeing if he's going to mesh with some of the guys, at least at this point in time, to potentially be a good long-term option to really help bolster Miami's front court in the grand scheme of things. And now moving over to specifically how this could help the roster. This creates a solid option behind Bam Adebayo and Kel'el Ware, adding another big man to this roster, because if you don't have Precious Achiuwa at this point in time, you're really relying on those two big men and maybe Jovic in some scenarios. But I also think he's going to be paired up with those two a lot of the time in some starting rotations that we could possibly see, especially with how he's developed over the course of this past summer, as I've mentioned multiple times. So I definitely think that, a lot of people might debate that either Kai Jones or Trey Lyles could have been somewhat of a more solid option, but both of those guys opting to take their talents overseas at this point in time. Precious Achiuwa being a very good looking option, at least for this Miami roster right now, I think could bolster a lot of upside to the success overall of Miami in terms of what they're able to do in terms of efficiency, at least in the front court. The guy's a tenacious rebounder, was an absolute stud when he played for Memphis, and quite honestly right now, Miami really just needs a big man on their roster that can be an efficient rebounder, be a solid option off the pick and roll, which the first go around with Miami wasn't necessarily the best option, but going back to the rebounding over the course of his career, he's averaged right around 5 rebounds and roughly 15 to 20 minutes per play over the course of his career. So if you bolster that, at least his minutes up a little bit more, that's a guy you can kind of plug and play a lot with Kel'el Ware and Bam Adebayo, whether you want to run, Achiuwa and Bam, or Bam and Achiuwa, or even, Jovic and Achiuwa in some certain scenarios, letting Ware and Bam kind of take a minute to kind of catch their breath at certain points in the game as well. So I definitely think this will bolster a lot of success in terms of what Miami could potentially do in terms of plugging and playing and utilizing potential options that they could really take advantage of in terms of their big men ability. And it really just gives them some extra size. I mean, granted, Achiuwa is a little bit of an undersized big man, but I definitely think in terms of the rebounding, it's going to give Miami a lot more much needed size under the basket and could give them another aggressive player who's developed his game, especially over his time in Toronto and with the Knicks this past season. So again, very just exciting to see Miami interested in not just wanting to acquire a big man to really add into the rotation, but them kind of voicing more of an interest in reuniting with a player that they know is going to gel with the team pretty well already and knows what it takes to be a successful player in Heat culture, at least at this point in time. So drop in the comments if you think Miami deciding to offer Achiuwa a 1-year non-guaranteed deal at this point in time was a pretty solid option, because I think at this point in time where everything stands, especially because they don't necessarily have to go over that luxury tax line right now in acquiring Achiuwa, I think it's a pretty safe move. And I think that if all goes well, especially with training camp, he could be a viable option in Miami's front court that could complement Bam Adebayo, Kel'el Ware, and Nikola Jovic, and even Jaime Jaquez pretty well in the grand scheme of things. And I'm excited to see what at least he's going to bring, at least in this go around with Miami, or if necessarily it doesn't go well, they could choose to ultimately part ways with him before the trade deadline or even before the regular season if they feel another suitor that they had just kind of signed over the course of this past summer going into training camp could be a better option. And at least at this point in time, I would probably want him to maybe be signed to more of a long-term deal over Terry Rozier, because like I kind of mentioned before, it kind of seems like Miami's is pretty much done with Rozier. And if they're at least going to invest in a player, I'd rather see them do it with somebody that could potentially be on the floor for Miami more consistently, contributing at least to an area of their game where Miami is kind of struggling, at least at this point in time right now. Achiuwa really being a really solid offensive rebounder. And I think that's going to speak a lot of volumes to the success of this team and potentially helping more games end up in the win column, but also giving a lot of the players a lot more of some second chance points, or at least chances to, make some of those second chance buckets. So again, I'm just excited to see how Achiuwa is going to mesh with the team and if this is going to be a solid fit, because I definitely think at this point in time, Miami, knowing what they're going to get out of Achiuwa, could definitely bolster more of a successful narrative than maybe picking up a guy like Kai Jones or seeing where things play out with Terry Rozier. Because again, it doesn't seem like they are all in on seeing how Rozier is really going to develop with this roster at this point in time, and could in some scenarios be more interested in paying him the $24 million to just sit at home and watch him play than maybe just sit on the bench at this point in time. But we'll just kind of have to wait and see how everything plans out. Again, no guarantee that Achiuwa is going to, stay for the long haul, but I definitely think that this is a good way to kind of experiment to see if he could be a good fit in Miami's front court that, like I've said all summer long, has really, really needed another big man to add in their rotation that could really complement the guys of, like I had just mentioned over and over again, Kel'el Ware and Bam Adebayo. And now moving over to some other news regarding Tyler Herro. It was interesting. This obviously no surprise to see him on ESPN's top 100 player list, but did he get snubbed at where he got put in that list, getting put at 68th on that list overall? And I thought it was just interesting because there were a few players that I thought were, at least in that top 60 bout that had kind of gotten ranked over him that I didn't really think were necessarily very fair. Dina Adiva being one of those players, and in addition to that, Aaron Naismith, Lou Dort, and then Christian Brown also being named ahead of him at 65th or 66th, 65th, and 62nd respectively. And I just think that in the grand scheme of things, how those guys were kind of laid out, at least in Miami's overall rotation regarding where they were. I definitely think Tyler Herro, being an all-star caliber kind of player, it definitely wasn't really a fair seeding to kind of put him there. I mean, maybe because defensively the defensive lack to his all-star type of resume kind of doesn't really look necessarily the best. But putting those guys 66, 60, or putting them throughout the ranking of, the top 60 all ahead of Herro really just in the grand scheme of things, I didn't really think was fair because I don't really see any of those guys as all-star caliber kind of players. And maybe if you plug them into different rosters or different scenarios, that could be the case. Maybe with Christian Brown being a very, very efficient scorer on just under 60% shooting, very solid. But again, I think because of the type of player Tyler Herro really is and what his success has brought to Miami in terms of where they've been able to go in terms of, especially last season, I think kind of put him, it's not really fair, I would say, to rank him under a lot of those players. So drop in the comments if you think Herro should have been ranked out of the top 60 and if naming some of those players I had just mentioned was fair and putting them over him as well. But that's going to do it for today's episode of Your Heat Latest here on FanArc. Don't forget to drop a like on this video and, of course, subscribe to our channel for great daily content, all pertaining to your Miami Heat right here Monday through Friday. Thanks so much for joining us on this Thursday. I'm Sam Shapiro. Have a great day.